The noise of the flashes nearly blinded him. Muhammad Ali had just emerged from a controversial interview, where, instead of discussing boxing, he spoke about racism, war, and religion. The crowd was divided. Some applauded him as a hero, others insulted him as a traitor. A reporter shouted sarcastically, "Aren't you afraid of losing everything, Ali? Fame, money, respect?" He paused for a moment, stared at the man, and replied with a firmness that pierced through any microphone, "Rather lose the whole world than lose my soul." This sentence set the room ablaze. While many clapped, others clenched their fists in anger. For Ali, this wasn't just an interview, it was a battle outside the ring, and perhaps harder than any punch he'd ever received in his career. At home, the tension was no less. His family suffered the consequences of the choices he made in public. His siblings received threats. His closest friends were under surveillance. Ali's mother, with tears in her eyes, told him, "Son, I'm scared. They won't forgive you." He hugged his mother silently, but inside he carried the anguish of knowing he had put everyone at risk because of his voice. Still, he wouldn't shut up. "If I stop speaking, who will speak for us?" he repeated like a mantra. Businessmen, on the other hand, were furious. $1 million contracts began to disappear. Major sponsors abandoned him overnight. In meetings, they called him ungrateful and foolish. But Ali, standing tall, his eyes shining, responded fearlessly, "Money won't buy me." And this stance only widened the gap between him and the world that had once adored him. The world champion boxer, a symbol of strength and talent, was now seen by many as a threat to the established order, and the pressure didn't just come from the media or businessmen. The government itself targeted him. When Ali refused to enlist, to fight in the Vietnam War, claiming he had no enemies among the Vietnamese, his life became hell. The court case dragged on, headlines called him a coward, and his titles were revoked. The scene was brutal. Overnight, the most famous man in sports found himself banned from doing what he loved most. He couldn't fight. He couldn't make money from boxing. He couldn't even defend himself in the ring. It was as if his identity had been ripped away with his bare hands. The following days were the darkest. Ali would wake up in the middle of the night, sweating, remembering the boos that echoed in every arena. He paced the house with heavy steps, as if carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. A close friend tried to convince him to back down, to apologize publicly. "Ali, just one word from you, and everything will be back to normal. You'll have your career, your glory, your money back. One word." But he firmly replied, "If I say that word, I'll never be able to look myself in the mirror again." Despite all the pain, he clung to his faith. Prayer became his refuge, the only place he found peace. Ali believed that every blow he received outside the ring was part of a larger fight, one that was won not with punches, but with courage. And it was this courage that kept him standing when everything around him seemed to be crumbling. Yet, deep down, there was fear. Fear of being forgotten. Fear that the world would only remember him as the champion who challenged his country and lost everything. This was the true adversary Ali faced, not a man in the ring, but the ghost of his own downfall, and it was in this abyss that doubt arose. Strong as it was, Ali began to wonder if it was worth it. What if they're right? What if I end up destroying my life with my own hands? This voice echoed in his mind as he stared into the mirror, seeing himself not as the invincible champion, but as a vulnerable man on the verge of losing everything he'd achieved. And yet, the answer came from within. "I can't betray who I am." The first chapter of the battle outside the ring was just beginning, and the world, which had once revered him, now watched him divided, waiting to see how far Muhammad Ali would go against all odds. Ali didn't know if he could win this war outside the ring, but he was certain of one thing: he would never kneel before fear. And it was precisely this decision that would forever change the course of his life. The silence was deafening. For the first time in years, Muhammad Ali didn't hear the sound of crowds chanting his name. There were no spotlights, no cameras in the ring, only the emptiness of a man forbidden from doing what he knew best. When they stripped him of his title, he felt as if they had ripped away not just a belt, but also a part of his soul. "They want to silence me," he muttered to himself, pacing the darkened room. And, in a way, they had succeeded. But Ali never accepted defeat as final. What the world saw as an end, he saw as the beginning of another battle. The persecution was brutal. Ali received hate mail daily. Some told him he should go back to where he came from. Others threatened his family. Friends drifted away in fear, sponsors disappeared, and even former allies preferred silence. The man once called the greatest of all time was now branded an enemy of the country. The price for remaining true to his principles was rising. One night, before a small group of young people who listened in silence, Ali raised his voice. Do you think this fight is just mine? No, this fight belongs to all of us. I am paying a price that many cannot afford. Meanwhile, the courts decided his fate. The government accused him of cowardice and treason. In the halls of justice, Ali was treated as a criminal, not a hero. Yet, when he took the stand, he showed no fear. Why would I go to Vietnam to kill poor, hungry men? They never called me nigger, never denied me food, never whipped me. My enemies are here, inside this country. His words echoed like a punch to the gut across America. Some hated him even more. Others began to see him not just a boxer, but a man willing to sacrifice everything for the truth. But off-camera, Ali was battling his own demons. The bills were piling up, and the family felt the weight of scarcity. His wife's eyes reflected constant worry. What if they never let you fight again? She asked one night when dinner consisted of a simple dish, a far cry from the banquets of yesteryear. He looked her in the eye and said firmly, I'd rather die poor than live on my knees. This sentence, spoken behind closed doors, revealed the essence of the man the world insisted on reducing to labels. Even without being able to fight in the ring, Ali found new stages. Universities, squares, auditoriums packed with young people who saw him as more than an athlete. He became a voice against war, racism, and injustice. His body wasn't in the ring, but his mind and soul were in constant struggle. Ali began to realize that perhaps his mission was greater than winning championships. Perhaps the true struggle lay in giving a voice to those who never had a chance to be heard. With each speech, the risk grew. There were undercover agents in the audience. Phones were tapped. Eyes were following his every move. But Ali, unlike many, didn't back down. If I die for telling the truth, I will die a free man, he repeated, without hesitation. It was this courage that inspired thousands of young black and white men and women to challenge the system. Ali had lost his belts, but he was gaining something even greater. The respect of those who saw him as a warrior outside the ring. Tensions were rising. The world awaiting his next move. He knew his comeback wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that time would prove him right. Ali didn't just throw punches. He had conviction, and that conviction was stronger than any blow he'd received in the ring. The champion was silenced, but his voice echoed louder than ever. The world might have stripped him of his titles, but it could never tear away his truth, and that truth would still shake history forever. If you've made it this far, you've already realized we're just at the beginning of this incredible journey. So, before continuing, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell. That way you won't miss the next chapters of this true story that will surprise you even more. The wait seemed endless. Years passed without Muhammad Ali stepping into the ring. Every time he watched another fighter raise his arm in victory, he felt a lump in his throat. That should be my place, he whispered to himself. But fate had chosen another path. He was condemned to fight something he could neither see nor touch: rejection, persecution, and loneliness. Ali's body remained in shape. He trained every day as if he were going to fight next Saturday, but his mind was tormented by doubts. The clock was ticking, and with it came the fear that his youth, his strength, and his speed would be lost without the chance to show the world who he truly was. Newspapers attacked him with cruel headlines. Ali, the cowardly millionaire, ran one cover, another read, the end of an arrogant champion. He read these words silently, but each one felt like an invisible punch. The audiences that had once applauded him now booed him in public squares, and even children insulted him in the streets. But amidst so much hostility, signs of resistance also emerged. Young people, students, and activists saw in Ali a voice that would not tremble in the face of the powerful. At universities, he was welcomed as a martyr who had exchanged glory for sacrifice. One professor even said before hundreds of students, Ali lost the ring, but gained eternity. These words lit a flame of hope in him. The trial continued to be a nightmare. Ali entered the courtroom as if he were a dangerous criminal. Suspicious glances, tense security guards, journalists thirsting for scandal. But even amid the pressure, he remained erect. A judge questioned him provocatively. Do you consider yourself greater than your country, Mr. Ali? And he replied calmly, but firmly, I am not greater than my country, but I am also not less than any man in it. The silence that followed was piercing. That sentence showed that, behind the boxer, there was a man aware of his greater struggle. At home, the battle was even more painful. Ali's children were beginning to feel the effects of rejection. They were bullied at school and the targets of malicious comments. His exhausted wife wept silently, hiding in the bathroom so he wouldn't see her weakened state. But Ollie noticed. At night, when everyone was asleep, he would sit in the dark living room and stare into the void. Am I sacrificing my family? He asked himself. Still, his internal response was always the same. If I give in, they'll never learn to resist. Despite being away from the ring, Ollie never stopped being a fighter. He turned his pain into fuel and used his voice as a weapon. He began touring the country, giving speeches, rousing crowds with impassioned speeches. You want to silence me? Then you'll have to silence millions with me, he shouted before packed auditoriums. Every round of applause, every look of hope he saw in the audience, was like an invisible victory. It was then that he understood that the fight against injustice was greater than any world championship belt. But even with so many supporters, the persecution was relentless. Rumors swirled that his home was under surveillance. Agents would knock on his door in the middle of the night with flimsy excuses of searching. The phone would ring, and on the other end, an anonymous voice would threaten, "Your life is worth less with every word you speak." Ollie would hang up without answering, but his heart was racing. He knew he could be eliminated at any moment, like so many other leaders who dared to defy the system. Time passed, and the pressure mounted. Many believed he would never fight again. Some said he was finished, that when he returned he would no longer have strength or speed. This thought hammered at his mind like a silent enemy. In training he pushed himself to the limit, as if he were racing against the clock. He ran miles, sweated gallons, punched the air with the same intensity as before, but the doubt remained. Will the world still believe in me? There he was caught between two worlds. On one side, the fallen idol, silenced by the powerful. On the other, the hope of millions who saw in him a symbol of resistance. But the big question still lingered. When and if he would have the chance to fight again. The gong rang, and the world held its breath. After years in exile, Ollie stepped onto the stage again with a look that mixed anger and forgiveness. His opponent rushed forward. He took 2 steps back, measured the distance, and smiled from the corner of his mouth. The roar of the crowd felt like a stormy sea, waves crashing against his chest. There was no time for nostalgia. There were bills, honor, and a name to recover. In the first clinch, he felt the strength that time had not taken away. During the break, no one talked politics. There was only a towel, water, and a dry remark from the corner. Do what you know. When he returned, his feet traced invisible paths, and each dodge felt like a self-forgiveness. In the end, the judge's scoreboard didn't matter. Rebirth mattered. As he left, the lights were harsh, but his heart was light. I'm back, he said softly, not to the cameras, but to the wounded boy who had endured all those years without a ring. And with a firm heart, he vowed not to give in to silence again. Never. The big night arrived, and the return took on the weight of destiny. Facing a rival who feared no legends, Ollie entered with his chest held high and the past on his back. He fought as if each step were a defended child, each jab an ancient protest. But the rain of blows from the other side brought a harsh truth. The pause was taking its toll. When the final bell sounded, the world watched in silence as the decision was made. He lost. It wasn't just a score, it was a wound to the image the country held of him. In the locker room, ice on the bruises, few words, and the heavy air of suppressed disappointment. Are you okay? Whispered a friend. I'm up, he replied, unblinking. The camera didn't roll as he stood alone, hands on the bench, breathing remembering all the names that had called him finished. That early morning, with his face throbbing, he decided something simple. He would return, and return better. The press opened the next day as a verdict. When they scheduled the fight against the most feared man on the planet, they said Ollie was going to make a sacrifice. He listened, smiled, and began training as if he had a lightning bolt stuck in his chest. In the African heat, he learned to listen to the crowd chanting his name like an ancient drum. Ollie Boma. The voices hammered, and it wasn't just encouragement, it was collective memory, demanding justice. That night, lying in bed, he confessed to his trainer, I'm afraid. The other replied, fear is a warning, not an order. Ollie accepted the warning and devised a simple plan, to tire the giant. It wasn't magic, it was endurance, patience, and a skin learning to communicate with the rope. That day, his opponent came like a train, tracks vibrating. Ollie clung to the ropes, protected himself, whispered through his teeth, spend it all, and the giant did. Then he took a deep breath and felt the weight lift from his shoulders. Alive, yes. In the locker room, his body sang a different tune. Swollen hands, a burning back, a stillness unseen in glory. There he sat on the bench, looked at his bandages, and laughed silently. Winning had given him back the world, but it had also brought a new question. How much would it cost to carry? On the mirror returned to him a man who was no longer just speed and brilliance. He was scars, discipline, and calculation. You can still go further, someone said. He responded with only a nod, knowing that every victory takes its toll. Outside, the party was in full swing. Inside, he organized the future like someone storing fine china in a house in an earthquake. He wanted to prove once again that he wasn't an empty legend. He wanted to make it clear that the myth hadn't saved him. These were hard choices. He put the belt in a simple bag, zipped it up, and breathed like someone closing a chapter. He knew outside there were screams and lights. Inside, the clock sharpened its blades. The hand trembled before the world. The flame rose, drew an arc of fire, and found the cauldron. The stadium exploded. There, he said nothing. His silence became a scream that crossed continents. His face rigid, his eyes watery, his arm fighting against an unseen enemy. In that moment, there were no belts, scoreboards, or provocations. There was a tired body and a spirit that refused to yield. "Can you do it?" the assistant asked quietly. He nodded, as if making a pact with himself. It was the same courage as always, but now without gloves. The world applauded the legend. Those who looked deeper saw the man. And there, under intense light, the mask fell without fanfare. Winning sometimes is just continuing to ignite something inside when everything outside the AR comes. The tremor didn't start there. It began on ordinary mornings, a glass slipping, handwriting that no longer came out neat, a step that lost its rhythm. "It's just tiredness," he said. The doctor didn't smile. "It's not tiredness." The word hung heavy in the air. He left the office with his head held high and his chest deep, as if he were on his way to the ring. At home, he walked the halls in silence, touching old photos, stopping before one where he smiled with adolescent strength. "I'm still here," he whispered to his reflection, as if summoning the past to face the present. On the table, pills piled up. On the floor, the shadow of someone who had already won in 1,000 ways and now learned another, to lose without giving up their soul. Fame exacted a heavy interest. Too many people around, advisors, businessmen, last-minute acquaintances with easy promises. He looked at his watch and understood that time is an enemy no one can defeat. Sometimes, money was scarce where it had never been. "You should rest," they advised. He preferred silent visits, hospitals, rooms smelling of alcohol and short-lived hope. He arrived there and the atmosphere changed. A boy held his hand, his eyes wide with astonishment. "Are you still strong?" He smiled with effort. "I am when I see you strong." It wasn't a catchphrase. It was the way he found to fight when punching no longer worked. The photos of those encounters were never the reason. The battle was something else. Making sense of the pain, contradictions also demanded presence. Harsh words from the past, hurts that were etched in the hearts of those who loved him in the ring and suffered outside of it. Pride and regret dueled within the same person. In discreet encounters, he asked forgiveness from those who deserved to hear. "I was wrong," he said bluntly to an old rival. The other took a deep breath, and for a second it seemed like everything would boil over again. But age made the peace that youth denied. "Then we move on," the rival replied, squeezing the trembling hand. It wasn't headline news. It was healing. And healing in silence is a kind of bravery that doesn't generate trophies, but restores the peace of sleep without the weight of old words weighing on one's chest. Within the family, the knots were harder. Absence took its toll. His children grew up while he crossed oceans, fights, cameras. There were slammed doors, suppressed tears, sentences spoken too late. He tried to make up for time the only way possible, by being there. He rebuilt routines. He attended appointments, simple lunches, and small laughs. He sat on the floor to play when his body needed bed. He listened to entire stories without interrupting, like someone who learns to win by remaining still. One night, his daughter covered him with a light blanket and said, "Dad, I forgive you." He closed his eyes, and that forgiveness was worth more than any belt held aloft under the spotlight. At home, finally, the champion the world applauded discovered where victory lay. His body continued to demand it. The words came slower, his hands heavier, but he insisted on appearing when the world demanded symbols, not to pose, but to remind us that courage doesn't disappear when the body changes. "Are you afraid?" a friend asked on a dim afternoon. "I am," he replied simply. "And what do you do with it?" he breathed, his eyes steady. "I'll learn to walk with it." The room fell silent. It was the response of someone who understood what many avoid. Not every fight ends with the sound of the bell. Some continue in empty corridors, without an audience, without a raised sign, without a judge. And yet, they say more about us than any stamped victory. In recent years, he organized memories like someone tidying up a house after a storm. He gave gloves to museums, photos to schools, stories to those who needed them to stay strong. He spoke less and looked more. He embraced strangers the way he embraced champions. With every gesture, he seemed to repeat the same message. What remains is not what I took, it's what I left. One day, walking slowly, he stopped in front of a mirror and saw no legend. He saw a man, with mistakes, successes, falls, comebacks, unafraid to admit failures, unashamed to say I feel. The myth the world constructed was great. The man he chose to be was greater. And it was thus, lighter, that he found rest for a heart that had always struggled so much. Ollie's life doesn't fit on a poster, nor in a highlight reel. Outside the ring, he faced the most difficult battle, maintaining his own truth when everything called for silence. He made mistakes, corrected himself, loved, stumbled, and started over. He discovered that winning isn't about humiliating others, it's about overcoming one's own fear. That fame doesn't buy peace. That forgiveness doesn't diminish anyone. It only liberates. That courage isn't about never trembling, it's about continuing to tremble. In the end, the legend illuminates, but it's the man who warms. And when the flame died and the stadium went dark, the simple and profound lesson remained. The most important fight of our lives happens away from the cameras, and yet it can ignite the world.